He is the current ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the United States. Ambassador Kujundžic's previous diplomatic posts include roles such as First Secretary of the Department for European Integration and Organization in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Minister Counselor and head of the Ministry's Department for North and South America, Australia, Japan, and Oceania. Most recently, Ambassador Kujundžic was Bosnia and Herzegovina's ambassador to Germany. He studied mechanical engineering and conducted his diplomatic studies in Bijeljina, Sarajevo, Oslo, and Vienna. So please join me in welcoming His Excellency Mitar Kujundzic.
Thank you.
I'm sure I completely mangled the pronunciation of your name. I apologize
it's
again.
very good. It's very good. Thank you. So thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here with you. It's my real honor, as also we did that last year. So basically, I will talk today about our country, about experience in our country in the terms called peace establishment. As you know, of course, you're probably aware, but just maybe to give some information about our country for those not completely familiar with that. So our country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, is a country in Southeast Europe, or narrow sense called the Western Balkans. The difference between terms Southeast Europe and Western Balkans is that Western Balkans is Southeast Europe in narrow sense. Definition comes from the European Union itself from 1996, called the regional approach, in anticipation that once the countries from that region would apply for membership to the European Union. So basically to countries of Western Balkans belong all countries of former Yugoslavia except Slovenia and with Albania. So it means Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Albania, and Kosovo, although Kosovo is under dispute, not recognized by all. I'm supposed to say that country I'm accredited to US recognize Kosovo, while my country at the same time does not. While the other countries in broader sense, Southeast Europe would be surrounding countries called Slovenia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, not Greece, because at that time, of course, Greece as an old member state of the EU was already at the EU, so not belonging to that Southeast Europe definition given by the EU itself. Just briefly about history of our country. So we can say that that actually establishment of our country would be from 10th century, although not at that time immediately independent. Basically, in some vassal status, mostly under Hungarian Empire. Then, as independent state until fallen under Ottoman occupation in 15th century. Basically, as a reference year would be taken 1463, and Ottoman occupation was replaced by Austro-Hungarian one in 19th century in 1878. 30 years after, in 1908, annexed formally by Austro-Hungarian. That status remained until end of World War I, when in 1918 Bosnia Herzegovina, together with other South Slav countries, by that time belonging to Austro-Hungaria, basically Slovenia and Montenegro, joined to Yugoslav Federation. And in Yugoslavia, Bosnia Herzegovina remained until 1941, when it was occupied but by, at that time, Nazi puppet state called Independent State of Croatia, as a part of Axis, following occupation of Yugoslavia, of course, by at that time by Germany, Italy, and Hungary, and Bulgaria as well. And then in 1945, the communists came to power, the Yugoslav communists as a part of the broader communist movement from Soviet Union. Bosnia and Herzegovina became part of communist Yugoslav Federation together with other 5 republics in communist Yugoslavia until 1992. Actually, dissolution of former Yugoslavia occurred in 91, 92, in our case in 92, when again, so after about 9 centuries, Bosnia and Herzegovina regained independence again. So until 1992, from 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina is again an independent state. Then, unfortunately, followed the war. So this is actually basically the title of this talk: how the peace during the war was established. Actually, how the war was stopped. But basically, just to say something about war itself, what was the cause? What were the causes of the war? Definitely, it was not issue of some economic issue. Definitely, it was not anti-communist revolution in Bosnia and Herzegovina at that time. Basically, what happened is that after collapse of communism, the free election in all Yugoslav republics were allowed, starting from Slovenia in 1989. In our country, the first free election, first since before World War II, were allowed in late 1990. And on those first free election, the communists were defeated. So the communists actually were out of power by that election. They also participated in that election, first free election, as said, but they lost. And the victors of those first free elections were national political elites. You probably know that our country is a multi-ethnic country, so it means mixed. It has 3, we called constituent or main people, called Bosniak, Croats, and Serbs, while we also have some minorities in our country, but beside them, so 3 main people. So 3 main people, 3 we called constituent people, to whom officially Bosnia and Herzegovina as a state belong, would be together Bosniak, Croats, and Serbs, and their national elites were basically victors of that first free election in 1990. And they took power following election. They formed coalition in order to take power from defeated communists. They were also supposed to agree on their future, to agree on the future of the country under their leading, because, as said, this is a mixed country, and they almost immediately entered into negotiations among themselves. How will the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina look like? And they negotiated for about 1.5 years. So when they took power in December 1990, they negotiated until the spring 1992, and they failed. And when they failed, the war started. So this is basically how the war started. Everything others, they differ now. They differ, of course, on causes the war. Some of them would say that it was civil war, that it was an internal conflict, while the others would say that it was an aggression of neighboring countries, Serbia and Croatia. But before that point, when they differ on causes of the war, the basic development leading to the war was the failure of their negotiations. They were not able for about 1.5 years. The national political elites, victors from the first free elections, now in power, at that time in power, of course, they were not able to find agreement how to proceed together in a common future. And the war started. The war in Bosnia and Herzegovina was one of wars, or if you wish, armed conflicts in former Yugoslavia, one of 6. It was a decade of conflicts in former Yugoslavia, starting by Slovenia in 1991 and ending by Macedonia in 2001. Exactly, it was almost exactly 10 years from July, from even late June 1991 until Ohrid Agreement for Macedonia in August of 2001. As said, it was 6 armed conflicts. So first it was Slovenia, the second one was Croatia, the third one was Bosnia and Herzegovina, the fourth one was Kosovo, the fifth one was southern Serbia, outside from Kosovo, and the sixth, the last one, was Macedonia. And of all those 6 armed conflicts in former Yugoslavia, the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina was the heaviest one, was the most terrible of all wars. The most people were killed in our case, up to 100,000. We had the most refugees or internally displaced persons. We are, at that time we were population about 4.5 million, and almost 2 million people were either refugees or internally displaced persons. So almost every second person was displaced from his or her pre-war place of living. It was also in the most material destruction, the most wounded people was in our case, and even the duration of the war was the longest in our case. Nominally, the war in Croatia was longer because the war in Croatia started in July 91 and ended by Erdut Agreement, part of Dayton Agreement, in November 95. While in our case it was starting from April 92 until Dayton Peace Agreement, November 95. But the war in Croatia had also at least 3 intermittent peace periods. So periods where it was some ceasefire, even cessation of hostilities, and so it was not effectively the war in Croatia the longest one. Nominally, only their war was longer than our war, but in reality, our war was effectively longer because in our case it was almost uninterrupted hostilities for 3 years and 7 months, even 3 years and 7.5 months, except that in about 2.5 months we had so-called temporary cessation of hostilities negotiated by former US President Carter, early 95. Apart of that, everything others were active hostilities in our country. So it was the most terrible war of all wars in former Yugoslavia. Also very complicated in political sense. The country was completely disintegrated. The country was disintegrated into 4 parts. So 4 different forces controlled part of territory in our case. In all others armed conflicts in former Yugoslavia, there were usually two sides of the war, 2 so-called belligerents. While only in our case there were even 4. It was internationally recognized government in Sarajevo. They actually under at the time called Republic of Bosnia Herzegovina government. So they controlled part of territory. They were only internationally recognized, while also 3 other parts. One was controlled by the self-proclaimed state at that time called Republic of Srpska. The next one, basically Serbian forces, controlled territory. The next one was controlled by Croatian forces. At that time, also self-proclaimed state called Croatian Republic of Herzegovina. And the fourth one was some Bosniak dissident part called Republic of Western Bosnia in most northwestern part of the country. So they also proclaimed their own non-recognized republic there and controlled their part of territory. So the country was completely disintegrated. The international communities tried to assist in peace establishment. They launched numerous peace plans. All of these peace plans, starting from even one last attempt to prevent the war, called Lisbon Lisbon peace plan. Then, actually, at that time, this Lisbon plan was accepted by Serbian and Croatian side, while rejected by Bosniak side. Then, from early '93, it was the next peace plan called Vensoven plan. It was accepted by Bosniak and Croatian side, while rejected by Serbs. The next was so-called Oven-Stoltenberg plan from autumn '93, accepted by Serbs and Croats, rejected by Bosniaks. Also, it was so-called the Contact Plan group, peace plan, accepted by Bosniaks and Croats, rejected by Serbs, until finally the US actually took the leading role and engaged in peace establishment. And this is the point of this lecture, that by peace plan, the peace in our country was established. In our country, it was the case that it was done in 2 steps. So it was first so-called separate peace agreement. You know, actually, from theory, that separate peace agreement would be called, because as said, there were more than 2 warring parties in our case. So when you have a peace agreement only between or among some of these parties, it is called separate peace agreement. Like most famous in history is afterwards actually non-recognized, but at that time called separate peace agreement from World War I, Brest-Litovsk peace from 1918. In our case, that it was first separate peace agreement between, at that time, government in Sarajevo and Croatian self-proclaimed part. It was Washington peace agreement, concluded in Washington in March '94, between only those 2 parts to the conflict, while with others the war continued. And then, after about a year and a half, a comprehensive peace agreement, again by American engagement with support of other main players on international scene, but led by Americans, was reached in Dayton, Ohio, on November 21st, 1995, when it was initiated and then solemnly signed in Paris on December 14. So this is how the war in our country ended, and this was overturning moment in history of our country. The main point in that regard is that a peace agreement was established. So unlike some other cases we can mention sometime later, all parties agreed to the peace, or to the peace agreement, either to first separate peace agreement or to the comprehensive peace agreement finally. So when you have all parties to conflict signing to peace, you have pretty clear situation. You can put peace building forces. You don't have anymore to impose a peace. You have just now, actually, when the peace was signed, just in order to implement that peace, you can put their peace establishment. Actually, not really peace establishment. It is called peacekeeping forces. At that time, it was NATO, agreed by all sides, and in 2004, replaced by European forces. The point is that now, or even it could be said, even 7-8 years after the war, the picture of the country was completely different. So now you wouldn't recognize that once there was a war there. It was really a success story of peace establishment. For example, UN was recalled from our country already in 2002. So there was no need. There was no need to keep UN mission there anymore. As said, NATO forces were replaced by EU forces in 2004. But even as probably one of most strong example is that the peacekeeping forces at the beginning were about 60,000 people. Now you still have that European forces, and they actually consist of about 1,300 people. In all these years, since peacekeeping forces came there, you recorded no incident. So never any international trooper, any international soldier was ever exposed to any hostile attack. Nobody was ever attacked. Nobody was suffering any hostile action there. Some of them unfortunately died while in car accidents or mine accidents, because it was also one of specialty in our case that we got when the war ended about 2 million landmines in the land remaining. Now it is cleared 3/4 of them, so it's still in process of cleaning. So about 500,000 landmines still in land in our country. So it was really good established the peace in our case. We can also mention that not only peace implementation in that military sense, which was actually very good implemented, as said, but also in political sense. So once disintegrated country into 4 parts were reintegrated politically, economically, links, connections among parts in the country were reestablished. You had, for example, in our case, only 3 years after the conflict, you had the real freedom of movement. Officially, of course, you had the day after peace agreement entered into force, but it was not real. That the day after somebody was able to travel to the other part. But in reality, only 3 years after you had complete freedom of movement, and only 3 years after, in 1998, nobody had any fear or any obstacles, not only legal, any real obstacles to travel through any part of the country saying I'm this or that and nothing would happen. So it is still, of course, in that way. As said, economic spaces were united. One single valuta was introduced in the country, connected to European euro. At that time, connected to German mark, now to European euro. It is worth to mention that once free warring parties, free enemy armies in the country were united into single one. So now we can one single army. We don't have particular armies anymore. This is one also achievement even beyond peace agreement itself, because it was not prescribed in the peace agreement itself. It is achievement additionally agreed by political parties in the country. Also some other law enforcement agencies were united. Police, some parts of police were remained in particular ways, but some others like on duty for sophisticated organized crime or terrorism or corruption also belong now to competences to a common police, joint police forces. Intelligence and security agencies were also once enemy, now united into single one. Also some other law enforcement agencies like State Border Service and some other as well. Also, it is worthy to mention that there was a big story in our country on war crimes issue, because it was actually the big story in the whole former Yugoslavia and almost all of 6 armed conflicts, but particularly in ours, because in our case it was pretty soon after the war started. It was actually found out that the war crimes are being committed on a large scale, and that at least belligerents' legal system was not able to prosecute and actually to enforce sticking to international humanitarian law. So the international community was forced to do something about that. They repeatedly invited warring parties in our country to stick to the rules of the international law, to respect them, especially by resolution from February 1993, and when finally this was not implemented by the parties to the conflict, they introduced, at that time, of course, there was no permanent international criminal court. So the international community, basically UN Security Council, was forced to introduce an ad hoc court, tribunal for former Yugoslavia in 1993, with seat in The Hague, which actually prosecuted, of course, all cases, all top cases of war crimes in former Yugoslavia, while the lower cases were given to the local courts. But point is that obliged to cooperate with the International Tribunal in The Hague, all authorities in Bosnia and Herzegovina did that without exception. So it means that our cooperation with International Tribunal and with domestic courts for war crimes was really without reservation and without objections from international community. So this is also one of big achievement in our case. Still, some processes are now ongoing regarding war crimes for the time between 92 and 95 in our country, in our countries, and it is going with actually some issues, but basically it is going without significant delays. Also, we can mention, for example, that the achievement of peace agreement was that to those refugees and displaced persons we mentioned, almost every second was either one or second was given back. So to no one, in some places there was some court processes, but basically to no one pre-war property was denied. Everyone was given pre-war property, and everyone was enabled to come back to the pre-war places of living. Although we must admit that not in all cases, or even in many cases, the people who in the meantime started living on another place were ready to return to their pre-war places of living. This is actually, we can maybe discuss on your question some details after, but this was basically achievements of the peace agreement. Now we can it's very important to say that the peace establishment in our country was so good that there is any prospect of any renewal of conflict in our country. So there is there is nothing real what would put in perspective that the conflict in our country is able to revive. we can say that actually that it is out of any rational approach that we can expect something of that. Why? There is several reasons. Of course, there is no willingness on domestic players, among politicians, also among people, because there is no readiness on people's sides to participate in any new conflict. There is no readiness by politicians. Even more, there is no resources for any renewed conflict. There is no material resources. For example, we don't have heavy weapons anymore. There is not human resources, because the new young people don't serve the army. We abolished military term. The new young people are not able to be soldiers, because simply they don't have skills in that regard, while the veterans of war, of course, almost 20 years after, even if they remain fit at the end of war, of course they are not able to even if they would be willing, they would not be able to be sustained soldiers in any time in the future. Also, very important point is that legally everything was solved. You know that in the conflict of former Yugoslavia, it was internationally recognized that there was no responsibility for the war itself. So unlike processes in Nuremberg and Tokyo, 1945-46, where the main, actually the first incrimination was a crime against peace. Only second incrimination was war crimes against humanity. And so in our case, there was no crime against peace. Why? Because it was internationally recognized that it would be very difficult to establish who was guilty for the war itself. So everybody is responsible for respecting rules of war, for not committing war crimes, but nobody is responsible for starting the war in former Yugoslavia. There is no such incrimination, while actually unlike in Tokyo and Nuremberg, where it was the main incrimination at that time. Why? Because there was no clear legal provisions at that time. It was considered as conflict in former Yugoslavia. It was not clear which rules the people were obliged to respect, and so. While now, when everything is signed, when everything is accepted by all parties, now it would be the direct responsibility of every politician responsible, for example, for sending some forces to some other part, because now the provisions are clear. Now it would produce the direct legal responsibility of those people in duty, in function, for example, sending some forces, even if they would have, to some other part. So this is one also from legal issue, and simple. There is also some other issue. Of course, there is no unlike in 1991-92, there is simple no resources for war, not only human and material, but even the atmosphere in the region is in the whole part of that part of world is completely contrary to any conflicting. Yeah. Okay. So actually, this would be about the conflict itself. Probably you are aware that there is still some political processes in our country, that not all political questions in our country are solved. We must admit that we finally got a new government last week, after a year and a half from last elections. We are the second country which actually needed so long for establishment, for creating a government after election. Why? Because our country, as said, is a mixed country, and the processes are pretty complicated. So it means that not only you need to have winner from last election, usually creating government with some natural political partners. But in our case, you need to have consensus even by winners from last elections, but from the different part of the country and from different ethnicities. I will just give you some example how it functions. We are semi-presidential country, so it means head of state had the main power, but not exclusively, of course. There is a role of parliament, but it's called semi-presidential system. It means that unlike, let's say, presidential system, like here, for example, here, it is always a situation that in executive branch, you have one party, the party from which the president is winner from last election, leading the country in that election period. While in legislative branch here in the US, it doesn't need to be always. For example, now it's not. Because in one chamber, there is one party majority, in another chamber, there is another. So they need to negotiate every law. In our case, it's even more complicated. Let's put also in some European perspective where you have parliamentarian system, like let's say in Germany. In Germany, you have two main rival in almost every election after World War II. So you have Democrats, you have Social Democrats. So they are main opposite political parties. They actually compete on every election. And after every election, the winners of them, one of them, usually creates government with some other smaller parties, natural partners of that big party, either of Social Democrats or of Democrats. But only 2 times in history it happened that no one part was able to form government only with their small satellite natural partners. So it happened in 1966 and 2005. In those, after those elections, as said, no party was able to form government with smaller parties, and they were forced to go together. So the main opponents went together into government and called not coalition, but the so-called Great Coalition. So in Great Coalition, they were forced to negotiate every issue. So the consent of all parties were needed. Now it's not anymore, because in 4 years after, in 2009, Democrats took power. Democrats won election. So only 2 times in history. Already now it's not anymore. But in our case, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is always. So always you have situation that you need consensus of all parties. So like today it is in US Parliament, when you have to have negotiated law between Democrats and Republicans. And like, for example, in Germany, it happened only 2 times in history. In our country is always and always, and under no circumstances you can reform system that you would have more, that you have simpler system. It is always complicated, and simple cannot be different. The last time the system was simple, and the last time there was no complicated procedure, it was the time of communist dictatorship, because the communists had everything very simple. They did not need to negotiate with everyone. They did not need to ask everyone to give consent. They just did what they wanted. So it is really worthy to say that there is no possible reform to simplify system in our country, because after any reform it will remain complicated, and this is a reason why so delay, and why so difficult negotiations among winners from last elections coming from different parts. And just mention before your questions, just to mention also that on international scene we actually identify 2 main foreign policy goals. One is membership to the EU, another is membership to the NATO, equal ones. In regard of NATO membership, we got to, in 2 years ago, we got to membership action plan, but without implementation. Why? Because we didn't solve some internal legal issues requested by NATO. Hopefully that we would be able to solve that and to start implementation of the membership action plan by Chicago NATO summit 20th, 21st May. And also in regard of EU approach is that we in 2008 signed stabilization and association agreement, not yet in force because the only one parliament is lacking ratification, European Parliament. Every member state, of course, we also ratified, but only European Parliament did not so far ratify. We expect that they will do that, and then we will be an associate member of the EU. Then of course, we expect candidate status. Probably we will apply for the candidacy. We will apply for by mid this year. We also had membership to the UN Security Council for 2010 to 2011, and it was estimated by many international factors that it was really good. For example, I will give you some examples. We actually acted pretty constructively on issues like Iran and on issue like Libya. I will mention to you that basically we made the resolute vote on resolution on Libya, which enabled basically humanitarian intervention, because at that time, of course, you already had 5 countries abstaining. So beside Russia and China, you had also Brazil, India, and Germany. So it is already 5 out. You need 9. The ninth vote pro could have been Portugal, but Portugal was reluctant to be. So basically, we were the decisive vote for resolution on Libya, and then Portugal just joined it. So at the end, it was 10-0 with 5 abstaining, and intervention was enabled. So this is basically how it happened in Libya. Although we had a substantial economic interest in Libya, but we acted very responsible in UN Security Council. And now I will just mention, I also told to you that there is some regional issues. As mentioned, in acting by us on international scene, we are the only country in the region, in the narrow region, which did not recognize Kosovo, except Serbia, of course. Yeah, okay. So on that, the reason why we did not that is something completely same like in our acting on Palestinian issue, because on Palestinian issue, our approach, and we basically blocked the necessity for the US to veto a resolution on UN Security Council on Palestine. Because if we voted pro, the US, they said they would. The US would be forced to veto that resolution, what in legal terms would be, of course, the same. But in political terms, it is far different. Why was that approach of us? Because we want to have agreed solution. So agreed between Palestine and Israel. We are not ready to recognize anything anything after unilateral moves. It was the reason why we did not recognize Kosovo. We even also would not have recognized if Serbia did something unilaterally. For example, if changes the status of Kosovo, or if changes the status of northern Kosovo. So also we are not keeping the side to Serbia. If Serbia did something unilaterally, we will not recognize. The only reason why we did not recognize Kosovo is the same why we did not vote for Palestine membership to the UN, because we want to have agreed solution. So it was our approach, and now maybe I'm open for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nasser.